Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gibbons. I'm the Policy Director of Defending Rights Dissent. It's a little bit after 4:40 here in Washington, D.C., where I am, but it is lunchtime on the West Coast, which is where today's guest is based at. I have the immense privilege today of being joined by Arun Gupta. Arun is a longtime board member of Defending Rights Dissent. He's also an independent journalist. His work has been featured in, he's an investigative reporter whose work's been published in the Washington Post, the Daily Beast, the Intercept, the Guardian, Jacobin, and he's the author of the forthcoming book, Bacon as a Weapon of Mass Destruction, a junk food loving chef's inquiry to taste, which perhaps we'll have to have him back for a future lunchtime live session. It'll be an appropriate topic. But welcome, thank you for joining us, Arun, today.
Thank you, as long as we have BLTs.
I'm a pescatarian, so we will not. Or you can, but I will not. So you've been reporting on the situation in Portland with police violence and far-right violence for years, probably before most people in the mainstream media even thought of this topic. And I'm going to give you time to explain the larger context of what's happening in Portland. But let's start with the story that's been in the news the last couple of days around Trump's police, his deployment of federal forces, and the sort of kidnapping of people off the street. Can you explain what's going on with that?
Sure. At some time, and the timeline is really unclear about a lot of this, but essentially over the July 4th weekend, it appears that a bunch of federal law enforcement officers from various agencies were dispatched to Portland and Seattle. And Trump had sent out this signed this executive order in June, late June, about the monument guardians, that they were creating a task force to defend just the terribly endangered statues and monuments, such that people were toppling. And they created this task force from various agencies, such as Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Marshals Service, the Coast Guard, and it's something like 2,000 law enforcement officers, and DHS agents include Border Patrol, this outfit called BORTAC. And everyone says oh, they're a SWAT team, but we have to remember SWAT team itself is a euphemism for a military force, right? SWAT is modeled after the military, and in fact, BORTAC, they boast about how they model themselves after special operations forces, right? So really, this is a military unit, or at minimum a paramilitary unit, that they dispatched to Portland. So they've been participating in these protests as an aggressor. The Portland police are already extremely violent. They have multiple temporary restraining orders against them, against the use of tear gas and various crowd control munitions. They have another separate TRO about not attacking journalists and legal observers. And this is because they have, according to the ACLU of Oregon, have just systematically been engaging in unconstitutional policing, violation, particularly of the First Amendment, and I'm sure others like the Fourth and 14th Amendments. So Trump puts these federal police into this situation, but the real story isn't, so it then comes out about a week or so later, there's an incident where a young man is standing across the street from the federal police. They throw some sort of weapon at him. It looks like a tear gas canister. He picks it up and just tosses it a few feet away, and he's holding a boombox above his head, and the U.S. Marshals shot him right in the head with a munition, and it was horrifying. It looked like they had killed him. There was just so much blood coming out of his head, and he is alive, but they did fracture they did severely injure him. So this is kind of the first blip in the news, and then a few days later, there's a video of these men in camouflage who come running out towards a person wearing black. It's in the middle of the night, something like 3 a.m., and you can tell that they're just freaked out. They just put their hands stands up. These men in camouflage grab this person and throw them into an unmarked gray van. And meanwhile, the videographer the whole time is like, "Who are you? You know, what are you doing?" And they don't say anything. And basically, it's secret police who are abducting people. And it turns out this has happened a number of times in the last week or so, where these federal agents and the Border Patrol took responsibility for that one. And they're far away from federal property, but at the same time, as it turns out, it looks like they have pretty broad powers, you know, under all the stuff after 9/11, like the Patriot Act and the reorganization of the federal government, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, to basically police anywhere they like, as long as they claim it's part of an investigation. But there's also a dispute of that DHS is being sued by both ACLU and the Oregon State Attorney General, claiming they're engaging in unlawful actions. So now from there, this creates a huge uproar, right? And so what then happens with Trump, who has this kind of almost like a supernatural ability to create chaos and conflict that he then spins into political gold. He saw an opening basically to rile up his base. And so from there, he is now announcing that they're going to be sending, you know, these federal police to other cities, and that, you know, these violent anarchists are out of control, that crime is out of control. And it's clear that this is an election stunt. But the real story, though, is that it really looks like this is not an invading federal force, because everyone is saying, I just got off the phone with Commissioner Joanne Hardesty. She's the rare public official in Portland and the state of Oregon who stands up to the police. And she's saying that, you know, the Portland police are lying about what they're doing, that they are absolutely collaborating with the federal police, and that the mayor is also lying. So, and he's basically going on national shows because the journalists don't know any better, and presenting himself as this kind of like brave member of the resistance opposing Trump's secret police, when in reality he's been fully aware that these secret police are here and committing atrocities against his own citizens, and has been completely silent about it for weeks, and only starts speaking up. And he under Portland's political system, it's a commissioner system, and he is the commissioner of police. So he's the one who is technically in charge of the police, and they have been cooperating, it appears, hand in glove with the feds. So this is not about an invading, occupying force. This is about how local police officials, and essentially, you know, a cowardly mayor, I've been told by members of his staff that, quote, the mayor's office is afraid of the police, have been creating this situation. And now Mayor Ted Wheeler is trying to essentially present himself as the brave defender of the people of Portland, when he has created the situation of this violent policing and created the context for Trump's secret police to come in.
So how did Portland become a staging ground for the use of federal police and for sort of far-right violence more generally? Written about this topic.
So this is part of the history of Portland and of Oregon. Oregon was founded as a white supremacist state explicitly. It was illegal for African Americans, mixed race people to even pass through the state in the 19th century. And until 1926, it was illegal for African Americans and mixed race people to reside in the state. It was a hotbed of Klan activity in the 1920s. During World War II, you know, as you saw this massive influx of African Americans to various cities, especially on the West Coast, to join the labor force for the Pacific War effort against the Japanese Empire. Portland really stands out as the most racist city. You know, African Americans who came to Portland said, you know, like, I'm from South Carolina, and Portland is even worse. So it has this long history of white supremacy. And what that did was it left Portland, the city, you know, there's about 2.5 million people in the metro area, 650,000 in the city. It's the whitest big city in the country. Its African American population is under 6%. So, you know, cities like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, you know, there's 1 million or more African Americans in these cities. In Portland, there's less than 40,000 African Americans. And African Americans are disproportionately killed by police, disproportionately arrested, disproportionately jailed, brutalized by police and the criminal justice system to this very day. And because it's so white, it also has the effect that you don't have a political class, a liberal, you know, liberal politicians essentially don't stand up to the police, because for one, we see this in cities all over the country, right? You know, that liberals are in bed with these violent, out of control police forces. And, you know, I think a lot of it is just the same of what's going on in Portland. Is these politicians are afraid of their own police forces. We see in New York, Mayor de Blasio, who ran on a platform of police reform, is completely been cowed by his by the NYPD and the police union. Like, he was actually defending NYPD ramming protesters with their vehicles. You know, so there is no like real organized force, oppositional force to the police. Then the third element is Portland has become kind of the center of anti-fascism over the years. It used to be a hotbed of neo-Nazis. You know, you have the whole like Aryan Nation, Christian identity movement in the 70s and the 80s. These violent white nationalists who were killing people. But at the same time, Portland starts to develop a significant anti-fascist element. And so this all comes together in 2017 that kind of makes Portland the perfect target for the right, because they want to present it as this like out of control, like radical left, which Trump does all the time. You know, this like Antifa city, right? And so the far right has been coming here to riot. And the Portland police have effectively been letting them do it, colluding. It has all the appearances of colluding, if not outright collaboration.
Was there an incident, Arun, where a member of a right-wing militia or right-wing group assisted the Portland police in making an arrest, or is that not?
Yeah, that was in June of 2017, and I wrote about it for The Intercept. This was a large. There was a right-wing rally after. So one of the main groups is called Patriot Prayer. In April of 2017, this neo-Nazi showed up at their rally, and they claimed like, oh, well, we kicked him out, you know, and he was throwing Nazi salutes and yelling, "Die Muslims." And just weeks later, he accosted 2 women on a train. 3 men came to their defense, and he stabbed and killed 2 of them and critically injured a 3rd. And so then they come back, Patriot Prayer and Proud Boys, who work together, they come back and hold a rally. And during this rally, the federal police, because the rally was it's in this federal park, it's right where the protests are happening as well now. They started just chasing this young man for no reason, and one of the militiamen was allowed to assist in the arrest, which of course completely violates policing guidelines. But from there, you know, I've written about it in Jacobin, Raw Story, The Intercept. You know, I would particularly point people to my piece called Riotlandia from about a year ago, where I go over why Portland has become a hotbed of far-right extremism because of the white supremacist history, the out-of-control policing, and the lack of any sort of like meaningful political opposition. And so this is what we see. We see first this Portland Portland is used as a white nationalist recruiting ground because it's so white, because of this history, and because they also have this opposition that they like to caricature as these spoiled white kids. Then this starts to turn into like actual mob violence. You have these rallies, especially in 2018, where the violence is just horrifying. And in one instance, in June of 2018, by numerous accounts, the police actually kind of marched the anti-fascists into this large mob of Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer. And reporters who were there said, you know, they were in Charlottesville and they were saying this was worse than Charlottesville. And so the police have also, in numerous instances, attacked anti-fascists who were being completely peaceful, and then without a warning, just unleashed their weapons on them. And so now what we have is the federal police on top of this. So we just see, you know, this progression from becoming a recruiting ground to far-right violence to local police violence to federal police violence. It's all part of this trajectory. And so to pin this on Trump is to completely miss what's going on here. And one of the constants is you have this mayor, Ted Wheeler, who is just completely cowardly. You know, but this is typical of big city liberal mayors, but he's really one of the worst.
So, what can other cities expect? Trump is talking about, and I know Portland, as we've discussed, has its own really brutal history of policing and white supremacy that has made it sort of a fertile ground for deploying federal forces. But Trump is now talking about sending federal forces to, I believe, Chicago, Milwaukee. What should those cities expect from this?
Well, so what's interesting is, like, you know, with Trump, he'll just invent stuff, and then the White House has to scramble to make his whims a reality. So on July 8th, Bill Barr had announced this like Operation Legend, which was a surge of like it was FBI and I think U.S. Marshals and might have also been DHS police to Kansas City, Missouri, to help with the, like, you know, dramatic increase with violence. And so this is different than Trump's monument guardians, right? And so what they're doing now is they're basically trying to use this other program to fulfill Trump's like political ambitions. You know, what he's trying to do is create this chaos and you know, add to the chaos and make things more violent, more extreme, so he can say, like, see, look at how out of control things are. I think, you know, there's a real danger here, but at the same time, we have to keep asking a question: why Portland? Why is it that it's always Portland where this begins? And so I'm not sure how transferable this is going to be to other cities. You know, because you have much more concerted political opposition. For instance, in Seattle, where they also sent this Monument Guardian Task Force, you have a veto-proof majority of the city council that is endorsed a 50% cut to the police budget. You also, that's where you also have the CHOP, the Capitol Hill Organized Protest, and that was because the mayor, who is a cop, she's a former prosecutor, Denny Durkin, was under so much pressure. 3 city council members there was this mass movement calling on her to resign, and that was endorsed by 3 of the 9 city council members. So she tried to throw the protesters a bone by having police vacate the precinct. So I don't think you're going to see as much cooperation there. There's also talk about sending them to Minneapolis, and yet you have a unanimous city council there saying they're going to abolish the police. They can send them, they're sending them to Chicago, but Chicago has a population of 1 million African Americans, probably like close to 1 million, you know, Latino and Asian people as well. So you have these massive communities of color that you're just probably going to put it into action. So, you know, there's a real danger, but we have to remember that this is a political stunt, and what worked in Portland may not work elsewhere.
Arun, if people want to find more of your work, where can they check it out?
The Intercept, Raw Story, I write for Indies Times, Nation, Jacobin. This is where all my stuff has been published. Follow me on Twitter at Arun Indy. I do have a website. I just haven't updated it in a while. So you can also find me on Facebook and follow me there.
Arun, thank you very much for joining us today. This was a very eye-opening interview. And thank you for everyone who spent their lunchtime with us on the West Coast, and for those of you on the East Coast, just your afternoon. And if you haven't already checked out our website, it's rightsanddissent.org. And I would also invite you to check out our podcast that's going on right now about FBI spying, which is where the graphic behind me is from. It's called the Still Spying Podcast. Our most recent episode featured Alex Vitale and discussed how does FBI spying fit into the framework of police abolition. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Arun, for being with us.
Thank you, Chip.